wasn't even the paintings, many of which I knew from childhood, the great Benjamin West paintings, and it wasn't even the paintings that I didn't even know were there. There was a wonderful hopper there that I'd never seen before. There was a wonderful Diebenkorn in the front hall. There's a wonderful Winslow Homer of a fox. I had never seen that. Maybe I had and forgotten it. It wasn't any of those things, wonderful paintings. There was nobody else in the museum except me. There was no one there. It was fabulous.
But that's kind of sad.
Not for me.
That's selfish of you.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
Looking should be selfish. Why not? Yes, of course. I mean, maybe there had been buses of school children there earlier in the day. I don't know. But I was there at 3 o'clock, not a soul.
Interesting. It is such a jewel of a museum. It is a wonderful museum.
And to be in the presence of art with nobody, not just anybody walking in front of you, but nobody talking.
Yeah.
That's the greatest pleasure of looking there is.
Okay.
Silent looking.
Dancing. That's a surprise.
My book began with the foxtrot. That's how the book started. The dancing chapter was the first that was written. It was written as an article for a literary magazine. And it came out of my ballroom dance excursions starting about 12 years ago. A lady friend of mine took me dancing, and all of a sudden I felt I was back on Dick Clark's bandstand in 9th grade in Philadelphia. Not that I was ever very good. Dancing was a great source of pleasure. And the dancing chapter was the first written, then the walking chapter, and then the swimming chapter. So it was the body stuff came first. But dancing is the odd one in the book for the following reason. All of the chapters in the book, except dancing, are about things you do alone. It's a book about solitude. Dancing you do with somebody. And one of my tenets, and I've talked about this endlessly and boringly to audiences, is that although we are told in school that if you are educated in aesthetics, if you learn to love music or play music or look at art or be a painter, you'll be a better person. That's not true.
No.
No, artists can be horrible, horrible people. Dancers, however, are better people.
Because they have to relate to another person.
Right. You've gotten an A, Paula. This is exactly right. When you are dancing with somebody,
Yeah.
you are accommodating yourself to the music
so
and to
true.
the demands of the other person. You must make yourself a partner. And this is a lesson in civics. And this is why I'm a big believer in ballroom dancing. I don't know whether you had to go to dancing school when you were a child.
I
Okay,
did.
it was horrible. Everyone hated
was.
it. The girls were always a foot taller than the boys. Everybody had sweaty palms. But for a lot of people, it was the first time they ever got to touch another human being. So that had a certain charm
Yes.
to it. But you were learning lessons about conduct and social life. May I have this dance? Now, of course, the women can ask the men to dance, thank goodness.
But it's also about coordination. I mean, coordination
Or
of the
efforts.
self.
Efforts.
Like coordination with another. And that is, you know, that's a profound idea, that you have to move to music with another person.
It's a tough assignment.
Yeah.
And one of the things you do is that you realize you are both accommodating yourself to the other person and to the music and also trying to have fun at the same time. I'm always interested when I see people who are able to move seamlessly across the floor and seem to be talking to one another at the same time. They're not concentrating.
Well, I have to say, when I read that chapter on dancing, it did make me want to go off to the, what is it, the Fred Astaire Dance Studio? Does that still exist?
Fred Astaire and Arthur Murray,
Arthur Murray,
they're
yeah.
great rivals. They exist everywhere.
So, because, I mean, one has to learn to dance before
Sure.
one can dance.
Sure.
So that's on the list for sometime in the future.
Your retirement in another several
Okay.
decades.
Well, maybe you'll teach me.
Okay.
Swimming. Now, what I found very interesting in this chapter was the fact you mentioned starting to swim. I think it was at the Harvard pool.
No, I learned at summer camp,
Well,
but I
starting to swim regularly.
yes,
you know,
yes. When
as a pleasure.
When I was in graduate school, I decided you have this thing called a body.
Uh-huh.
I was 22 or 23 years old, and I never had played sports as a kid. You have this thing called a body, and so maybe you should use it.
So you began to swim for pleasure on a regular basis, and then later in your life, and I don't know quite how much later it was.
38 years.
You decided to take swimming lessons.
Yes.
And they told you, of course, you were swimming all wrong.
Everything was wrong. Everything was wrong.
And you, at least for a while, lost the pleasure. So I thought that was interesting because you were concentrating on the form. And then eventually you got back. Did you get back that original pleasure entirely, or was the sense of doing it correctly, did that always somehow get in the way?
I think anybody who is engaged in any physical activity like golf or tennis knows exactly what I'm talking about. When you take a lesson, when you're doing a class, you're focusing on this, that, or the other, and it's hell. It's horrible. And then, or somebody who's a performer, somebody who's going to be an actor on stage or a musician, you practice, practice, practice. Then you go out and you forget everything you've ever been taught, and you just do it.
Yeah.
The idea being that you've somehow managed to integrate or internalize all of the lessons, and then the pleasure can come back.
Listening.
I'm listening. One of the things I think is that everyone, I don't know whether this is right or wrong, everyone has a tendency, a propensity, either towards the eye or the ear. Mm. Mine originally was the ear. That is, when I was a kid, I didn't paint, I didn't go to museums. I was interested in music. It was listening and talking. Those were pleasures. So when I was a kid, I played the piano and I went to concerts. And so music was very important to me. And I remember going to children's concerts at the Academy of Music, which I remember mostly for the itchy flannel trousers we had to wear, because boys and girls had to get dressed up. Girls wore little Mary Janes and little dresses and pinafores, and we had to wear trousers and ties and jackets. So that was unpleasant. But something in the music obviously seeped into me. And when I was a teenager, I went back to the Academy on my own and went to concerts voluntarily. So music stuck with me.
So the listening is mostly to music.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. What else? To other people?
Well, but I guess I can see your difficulty here, because if it were listening to people, there's so much talking that you would have to respond, whereas with music, you just listen. You keep your mouth shut.
The second rule I gave to my students after never go anywhere without a book was never go anywhere without earplugs, because there's too much noise in our lives.
Well, finally, writing. And writing, I just want to say that you make the point, and I can concur here, that writing can be incredibly painful and difficult and frustrating and annoying, and yet a great pleasure.
The year before this book came out last May, and the summer before, I was talking to our former poet laureate, Louise Glick. Not a person we associate with words like pleasure or happiness, a kind of glum lady. And she said to me, Willard, I know you were writing about dancing in the book. What are the other pleasures? And I said, Louise, in order, the chapters are reading, walking, looking, dancing, listening, swimming, and writing. Long pause on the telephone. Writing, she said. I said, Louise, we're not all as neurotic as you are. And at least I got a laugh out of her. No, writing, like anything, causes pain, but the pleasure is there at a certain point when you know you've gotten something right in language. That's what the late poet Howard Nemeroff said a poem is. So a poem is a way of getting something right in language. It's like playing with paints or something. You're playing with words.
I agree.
And that's the fun of it.
And it is a great pleasure when it works.
Sure.
Now, we're almost out of time, and I absolutely want to show our viewers the picture of you that occurred in the New York Times. You were one of a number of professors who were chosen for your sartorial chic. And the picture of you is fabulous, and to me, it looks just like a John Singer Sargent painting. I wondered how you felt being a model, essentially,
how I
a
felt
male model
doing it,
and what kind of after effects that picture brought.
I read an article about this. It was painful. It was horrible. If you think that the life of a model is sex and recreational drugs and liquor, and it's hard work, and you don't even get to keep the clothes. I was in New York. I came down from Connecticut. I took the train. I met a bus at the Times building. They whisked me downtown for the fashion shoot, which is at a little street called Patchen Place in the West Village. And thank God it wasn't too hot, but it was August. and we spent an hour in the bus going over outfits, putting things on, taking things off. The guy who was I've never had more help in my life. There was a makeup woman, there was a hair woman, there was the photographer and the photographer's assistant, there was the stylist and the stylist's assistant, there was the editor and the editor's assistant, and there was the bus driver.
As far from academia as you can possibly
Where
get.
there's no assistance whatsoever.
Exactly.
And they stood me up and they said, turn this way, look that way. 9 million shots. And I could see that they were all sort of whispering to one another. What were they whispering? I said, they're whispering, he's too old, he's too fat, he's too ugly, we made a terrible mistake. And then every 2 minutes or so, the makeup girl would come over and say, no, we have to dab your nose, or the tie is a little askew. And then they would say, you're looking a little tense, could you relax? I said, how could you relax when there are people adjusting you every minute? And so after an hour of taking pictures and changing clothes, they deposited me at Penn Station, and I ran into the bar and had a martini and took the train home.
Well, I thought the results were terrific.
Thank you very much. The other thing about it, which I didn't like, of course, I said to a friend of mine who was a journalist, will they let me help decide which picture to use? He said, are you out of your mind? You're a piece of meat. You're not Julia Roberts. They don't care what you think. And in fact, all of the 6 people who had their pictures taken had one thing in common. None of us was smiling. When I take pictures, I grin. I mean, it makes me look cheerful. We were all looking kind of glum, and that's because they wanted to sell the clothes.
They wanted to
Not
sell
us.
the clothes, but also I guess they felt that's what professors look like. They're serious.
I guess so.
Anyway, we have to stop. We're out of time. I could go on forever with you. Willard Spiegelman, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Paula.
And thank you for joining us today at the Drexel interview.